Welcome to Love Factually, the podcast that analyzes rom-coms and romantic films using the science of close relationships. We're your hosts, Paul Eastwick and Eli Finkel. Eli, what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, the 2004 fever dream directed by Michel Gondry and written by Charlie Kaufman, a script that won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. The film explores the implications of a new technology that allows people who are enduring grief or heartbreak to erase memories of their former partner. Some of the themes we'll explore are worst practices for communication during conflict, how to manage relationship expectations, and why we like different people for different reasons.
And fair warning, we'll be spoiling this movie today. So if you don't want to know why it's a bad idea to tell your chatty partner constantly talking isn't necessarily communicating, go ahead and watch this movie and come back. So, Eli, tell us, who are the key characters and couples in this movie?
The film tracks the relationship between Clementine Kruczynski and Joel Barish. Clementine, played by Kate Winslet in an Oscar-nominated performance, is impulsive, free-spirited, and extroverted. After an agonizing fight, she erases Joel from her memory. Joel, played against type by Jim Carrey, is reserved, introspective, and shy. After learning that Clem has erased him, he returns the favor. The film also introduces us to four notable supporting characters. First, Dr. Howard Mierzwiak, played by Tom Wilkinson, is the founder of Lacuna Inc. He's an entrepreneur and pioneer in memory erasing technology. Stan Fink, played by Mark Ruffalo, is a senior technician at Lacuna. He's the one who performs the procedure on Joel. Patrick Wirtz, played by Elijah Wood, is Stan's assistant. In a company of ethically compromised individuals, he's probably the creepiest. And Mary Svevo, played by Kirsten Dunst, is a receptionist at Lacuna who is in love with the much older Dr. Mierzwiak. There is more to that story than meets the eye. So, those are the chess pieces. Paul, are you ready to give us 1 minute on how the film moves them across the board?
Yes. Now, this is yet another movie that jumps back and forwards in time.
Good luck to you, sir.
I'm going to do this in chronological order, kinda, sorta.
Nice.
All right. So count me down.
On your mark. Get set. Go.
Joel meets Clementine at a gathering on a beach in Montauk. They have a number of happy moments early in their relationship, including a memorable trip to lie on the icy Charles River. Things start to turn, though, and they have more and more conflict, with their relationship ending after a huge blow-up fight. Clementine then decides to have her memories of Joel erased at a company called Lacuna. Joel then decides to have his memories of Clementine erased, and we see his relationship with her in reverse, all while his consciousness is putting together that a Lacuna employee, Patrick, is seducing Clementine using information that he was able to glean about Joel. Joel wishes he could stop the procedure, and in his last Montauk memory with Clementine, she asks him to meet her there. Now, back in the real world, both Clementine and Joel are drawn to Montauk, where they meet again, seemingly for the first time, and go to the Charles River again, and they seem to be rebooting their relationship, and then a former Lacuna employee, Mary, gives them the tapes containing the full harsh history of their relationship, and they decide to give it a second try anyway.
Oh my goodness, 59.9 seconds. I did not think you were going to do it. There was like you sort of sped up in that final turn.
I just beat up. So Eli, my relationship to this movie, I don't know about your relationship to this movie, but, we haven't really talked about this too much, but in the 90s, I kind of admit most romantic movies actually didn't really do it for me in a major way. I've come to see the error of my ways. I was wrong. I just want to be clear about that. But this might have been the first or maybe the second movie that I'd seen that was this combination of romance, real, where the relationship is the meaningful core of the movie, and sci-fi, right? With the other one probably being Vanilla Sky, which was like a little bit before this.
Yeah.
And I feel like that just like something cracked open. I was like, we can show real relationships, But it doesn't have to just be the sappy tropes, which again are sometimes very good.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's also fun to embed these things in something that sort of pulls the mind in different directions that you would, not normally get out of the more standard fare romantic movie. And so I remember this movie very powerfully for that reason.
All of that is fascinating. And I had a similar experience that this is like a genre of movie that didn't feel like a romance. It didn't feel like it had all of those tropes. And I loved the way this film felt. Also, the way it was filmed is so incredibly memorable. The images and some of the lines. Like, I completely remember from the first time I ever saw it when she leans into him and says, "Meet me in Montauk." and the scene that, when they're revisiting, when they're erasing Joel's memories, and the two of them are in that house on the beach, and the house is crumbling down around them, and they're trying to connect as long as they can before the memory actually totally evaporates due to the procedure. These are such profound, deeply embedded memories in my own mind, and it was just delightful to revisit them.
Yeah, it's pretty cool how it's all being done with like practical effects and stuff, right? You can tell it's like very tangible. Yeah. So let's talk about what this movie gets right about the nature of close relationships. Why don't you take it first?
I have a lot to say here. I think the lowest hanging thing, but it deserves real credit for this, is, how we communicate during conflict, right? And this is maybe the single best studied topic in relationship science. People like John Gottman and many others pioneered a bunch of procedures for doing this, but there is a scene in this movie that is basically a how-to guide for how not to fight when you're having conflict with your romantic
partner. If you want to destroy your relationship, do this.
This is the exact sequence. And one of the famous ideas in relationship science, it's been well publicized, is this idea of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. John Gottman came up with this idea. What he did is he recorded couples, many couples having interactions, and then he just, in sort of a bottom-up way, was like, well, what sorts of things are they doing? And then tried to use that to predict over time what predicted breakup best. And he says that there are 4 things: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And this movie does a good job of illustrating all of them. And in fact, in one scene, does a gorgeous job of illustrating at least 3 of them.
It's 3 o'clock.
I kind of, sort of wrecked your car.
You're driving drunk. It's pathetic.
I was a little tipsy. Don't call me pathetic.
Well, it is pathetic. It's fucking irresponsible. Could have killed somebody. Oh, I don't know, maybe you did kill somebody. Should we turn on the news and see? Should I check the grill to see if there's children or small animals?
It's just a fucking dent, Joel. God, you're like an old lady or something.
What are you like? A wino?
A wino? Jesus. Are you from the 50s or something? A wino? Face it, Jolie. You're freaked out because I was out late without you. And in your little wormy brain, you're trying to figure out, did she fuck someone tonight?
No, see, Clem, I assume you fucked someone tonight. Isn't that how you get people to like you?
That clip does a terrific job of illustrating some of these 4 horsemen. The first of which is criticism, which is where we attack our partner's personality or character instead of the specific issue. So you see Joel saying, like, it's fucking irresponsible, right? And he's really pointing to her having a character flaw. And the film does such a beautiful job at illustrating contempt, the second of the horsemen, which is where we act superior to our partner, like mockery or disrespect. And they both do this. Like, did you catch in there?
So bad.
When Clem says, in your little wormy little brain, they are just standing from on high, shooting disgust darts at each other. Defensiveness is where we sort of, instead of engaging with the issue, we express righteous indignation or playing the victim. That one doesn't come as strongly through in this particular clip. But the last one is stonewalling, where We withdraw physically or psychologically rather than engaging with our partner's concerns.
Yep.
And that's literally what happened at the end, where
Yep.
Clementine just says, I'm done. She doesn't even say it. She just gets up and leaves. And by the
Yep.
way, is there any more vivid example of stonewalling than getting up, leaving, and then systematically erasing
the person from your
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. I would also say about that scene in particular, but also a lot of the fights have another conflict feature called negative reciprocity. And negative reciprocity is when one person says something that's like a little hot, right? Coming in with, you know, a little too much spin on the ball, and then the person responds with more anger, with more contempt, and then the next first person responds again with more anger and more contempt. So things just get more heated over a sequence in interaction. Right, it escalates, and we see that here too. And that kind of escalation is just absolutely the worst case for handling conflict. And it's not just this scene too. I mean, this is the worst of all of them. But there's 3 or 4 where they're having these interactions that just start to go sideways.
Mm-hmm. You know, in fairness to both of these characters, it's hard not to reciprocate negativity. If you come at me with what was the line here, right? Like, in your wormy little brain, it's hard to respond to that with like, you know, I felt a little disrespected when you said that, and can we talk more soberly? Like, the temptation really is to lash out. The problem is, if I lash out and then you lash out and then I lash out to that and so forth, we end up in a very significant fight, the sort of fight that's predictive on average of divorce.
It's also interesting, too, how, you know, it's clear that the caring was there earlier in the relationship. Now, we, the viewers, we don't see those things until later because we're going backwards in time. But when we eventually get more to the good times in their relationships, there was a lot of caring. There was a lot of listening to each other. There was a lot of intimacy there. So it really looks like what had been lost was the ability to, when things get heated or when a little bit of contempt leaks through, the ability to bounce back to that intimacy, bounce back to the listening, bounce back to the caring. And like all of that just seems to be gone when these big fights are happening.
We'll talk more about this later, but I think we have to believe, for this movie to have any chance at a happy ending, we have to believe that it's something that people can get back. Even when they've gotten into a bad set of patterns, that they might be able to figure it out and get back to that better stuff.
Well, that's exciting because that leads to one of the things that this movie gets right. And I admit, as I'm putting this in the gets right category, I'll also admit at the same time, there's not a ton of research that does this well. But I think these ideas are core to relationship science theories. And that is that our relationships are fundamentally bound to a particular person, right? And that the way we think about our relationships is always about what is this person like and what is my history with them. Okay, so this leads to all sorts of interesting implications in the case where you have removed somebody from your memory. So one point that the movie makes with the Patrick character, who tries to swoop in and essentially steal Joel's identity in order to seduce Clementine, is that it just doesn't really work, right? Patrick can't come in and use Joel's gifts and Joel's lines and Joel's mannerisms to try to, and even do some of the same events, go to some of the same places that Joel went to with Clementine. It doesn't work when it's coming from somebody else. And I think some of that is like, Clementine is like, why does this feel so familiar? But the interesting relationship science implication is sort of not the sci-fi angle, but rather the idea that the reasons that one person appealed to you really kind of have nothing to do with why the next person appeals to you. That you can't take a reason why you like somebody and just go copy paste onto somebody else. And I think that is a very insightful way of thinking about why we like people. Yeah.
It's such a good illustration of this point that you're making. I think in part because you see Patrick, again, Elijah Wood's character, the creeper who works for Lacuna Inc., and you see him rifling through Joel's stuff and doing literally exactly what he knows is what Joel did. He literally gives her the same gift. He literally says the same things when they're on the same sort of date together, and it just doesn't match. It just doesn't land for her. Now, to some degree, it's because Patrick was sort of insensitive about it. For example, one of the things that amused me when I was watching it this time is Clementine's always changing the color of her hair. Yeah. And one time she comes in.
Very helpful for the viewer to understand where we are in time.
Totally. Yeah. So one of the one of the things she does is she dyes it like a bright orange. I think it's technically called tangerine.
Right.
And she and Joel end up having this thing where he sort of calls her Tangerine, and she says, "Ooh, Clementine the Tangerine, I like it." And then later, Patrick knows that that's like a cute name that the two of them had, and he's using it on her. But at that point, her hair is blue.
Her hair's blue.
So I mean, it's almost absurd, right? The movie is absurd in how it's critiquing this idea that you can just take the general behaviors, those same behaviors worked on this woman last time, and they're going to work on this woman this time. They basically take that to such an extreme to call out the mockery, to call out the absurdity of the idea.
Exactly. Now, I think there's sort of the other side of this coin is the question of whether, at the end of the movie, when Clementine and Joel have decided to reboot their relationship, there is any hope that it could go differently this time. Mm-hmm. And that really hinges on whether you think this target-specific way we have of thinking about partners is something that is fundamentally bound to the nature of two people and what happens when they come together. Because if it's that sort of destiny process, this is not likely to go well. Mm-hmm. But if you think that it's about history and choices made along the way and small decisions that either add up in a positive direction or in a negative direction, then maybe you do have hope for them a second time. Mm-hmm. And again, these are some of the sort of bigger, headier issues that relationship scientists have to confront, right? Yeah. Why do you love your partner so much? Well, is it because of these two the qualities that you have that the two of you brought to the table? Or is it because of this path that you carved together? And I think if you think it's the latter, you come away from this movie more optimistic than if you think it's the former.
Yeah, and I'll admit, I come away optimistic from this one. Sometimes we talk about this idea of gear alignment as a way of thinking about what I think a lot of people and a lot of theories in relationship science think, which is that, I'm a gear of like a certain shape and size, and I need to find somebody who's like the right shape and size so that like when I start turning in a circle, the gear turns in a circle in a way that like the teeth align rather than misalign. And the idea that you're developing here is that that's not the way this stuff works. That there's not like I'm a gear of a certain size and anybody who could fit that gear, who would align with me when we both started rotating, would be a good fit for me. It's instead this idea that we have to build and cultivate the relationship together rather than finding two people who just happen to align from the start.
Yeah, that's great. So do you have any other things you liked about what this movie got right?
There's a lot in here. I mean, one of the things that really hit me, and maybe me more than it would most people in the relationships world, is the nature of the ending. So this is a clip that we're going to have to lay right before the listeners right now.
I'm not a concept, Joel. I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. I'm not perfect.
I can't see anything that I don't like about you.
But you will.
Right now, I can't.
But you will. You will think of things. And I'll get bored with you and feel trapped because that's what happens with me.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
I love that clip so much, and I love how
it's so good,
and I love how it leads. Did you catch it? Leads directly into that Beck cover. He does a cover of the Corgis song "Everybody's Got to Learn Sometime," and the two lines that start right as the movie ends is "Change your heart, look around you. Change your heart, it will astound you." And what I think this movie intends to say, is that we don't need partners to be perfect, and we don't even need necessarily to improve for each other. We need to be willing to say, what are the things that are crucial? What are the things that I really need in a romantic relationship, in this romantic relationship? And am I willing to accept some of the things that frustrate or disappoint me? And when she says, you know, you'll think of things and I'll get bored with you and feel trapped because that's what happens to me. And he says, okay. And she starts crying and says, okay, that's enough. And this, again, is one of the big ideas for me. One of the big things is when is it? I developed this idea in the book I wrote, The All or Nothing Marriage, that basically what we need to do is figure out where are our strengths, the two of us, where are we really, really good, and then put a lot of emphasis on those to try to make them as strong as possible, but also to identify ways in which, you know what, we're not really perfectly tailored to each other on these dimensions or in these ways, which of course is true in every relationship. Every relationship has some of these. And letting go and saying, okay, you're going to get bored, and that's what happens with you, and I can deal with that. And she says, I can deal with that, and we're going to go forward. And then change your heart, it will astound you. It's so beautiful.
It's great. So what are some misconceptions about relationships that appear in this movie?
I have a couple. Do you want to get us started on this one?
Yeah, I'm going to just start with like the most obvious one, but I think the movie knows it. Like, just to be clear, the neuroscience is bullshit. Like, this isn't how memories work.
They know.
Okay, yeah, I totally agree. I just wanted that to be clear.
Yeah.
Memories aren't stored in like little places where you can find them and zap them like it's Space Invaders. Okay, but on a more substantive point, I thought that this was interesting. So the idea that Joel is going backwards in time in his relationship, and he's starting with these really negative experiences, right? We start off with like 3 or 4 fights of various forms, and then it gradually gets better and better as he goes further back. And these are supposed to be his memories, his projections, right? Okay, so what's interesting to me is that is actually probably capturing the trajectory of most relationships that end. They start out well and then they go badly. But it doesn't actually reflect what people's memories of their relationships look like on average. So when you ask people to try to reconstruct their memories of their relationships, they do kind of a funny thing, which is they remember the early times as being not as good as they actually were. This is some work by Nancy Fry and Ben Carney at around this time that this movie came out. And so they don't remember the beginning of the relationship to be as good as it actually was, because in this study, they have both the retrospection and the reality. And then what people do, because people have to somehow like get their trajectories in their minds to connect in the present, is they say, "Oh, we got better recently." Right. So a few months ago, like we were really fighting a lot, but over these last few months, actually, it's been pretty good. And that's sort of, they talk about it like a little bit of motivated reasoning that makes you feel like you're on the upswing now. But anyway, I thought that was interesting that Joel's memory weirdly like conforms to reality more than it conforms to most people's memories.
Fascinating. That's a good insight.
It's a little nitpicky, but I thought it was interesting vis-a-vis the science.
That's right. One little thing on that before I get to the thing or two I had here is it's kind of wild, right? Because we're happy in our relationship, we convince ourselves that we were less happy in the past than we really were. Right? And and it makes sense why we do that. We do that to make us feel good about the trajectory of the relationship. But it's kind of a wild thing that we do.
All right. Got to feel like you're moving up. All right, what do you got?
Right. Now, I was terrible in the past because I'm really into it now. So 2 things that I thought were somewhere in the ballpark of misperceptions. One is I think the movie is too cynical about love. And again, in the end, I think the story is more optimistic than pessimistic about the key relationship. But let's consider the other relationship. So we haven't mentioned that Joel has this couple friend, this Rob and Carrie Eakin. And they are just awful. They like fight and fight and fight and fight and fight. And that's the only thing we see about it. And you know,
they seem to just detest each other.
They seem to just detest each other.
Like, oh my God, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just interesting because obviously that was a deliberate choice from the filmmakers. And so what are they trying to tell us as a contrast to our main couple? Like, are they telling us like every relationship's like this? Are they telling us like you guys have more good than that one? It's not really clear, but it's a pretty negative example. And also the other examples we have are, involve love triangles between the character of Howard, the doctor that's in charge of this stuff, and Mary, the receptionist. So she's in love with Howard, right? We've talked about this. And she doesn't know that she's been in love with him before and that she's had her memory erased. But it's interesting because Mary is in love with Stan, like the head technician guy, or at least dating him, but clearly more interested in Howard. In fact, it's so awkward that when Howard gets there the night that they're erasing Joel's memories, Stan just goes outside because she's so flirty with this much older guy. But of course, Howard's also married. Right. And so what you're witnessing is like Mary has this partner, but like can't wait to drop him for Howard. And Howard's married, but has already had an affair with Mary. And it's just got like one relationship after the other that seem pretty flawed.
Yeah. So there is some cynicism in this movie that comes through, in fact, more palpably than some of the others that we've done. I mean, the other thing to keep in mind here is that Howard clearly has a major role in encouraging Mary to get her memory erased, and it seems like the kind of thing that he's doing to like cover his own ass for having an affair. And that's not to say that people don't do nasty things to try to cover up affairs, or that they don't hurt people in the wake of a relationship and stuff like that. But you're right that we are seeing a lot of the negative in this movie. Yeah. The positives are in there. We encounter them sort of in the back half of the film as we're finally encountering Joel's positive memories. But it's mostly cynical. It feels mostly cynical as you're watching.
Yeah.
Are we okay with everything in this movie? I mean, any ethical dilemmas raised here that you flagged?
There's a lot of moving parts here. On the standard sorts of stuff that we sometimes critique, it mostly did well. Although, did you notice that Clem at some point just like spews an anti-gay slur at Joel? The two-syllable version of the anti-gay F word. I was so shocked by that. And then I think there's a couple things we could consider. One is the ethical behavior of the characters, right? So, for example, Mary, once she discovers that she herself had been through the lacuna memory erasure procedure, feels like disgusted and disgruntled and sends everybody's equipment back to them, sets all of the tapes and files back to the people who had had their memories erased, and I'm sure felt incredibly self-righteous in doing so. What's your take? Was that like the ethical or the unethical thing to do?
It's so funny. I think this is one of those things where I get so wrapped up in the drama of the end of the movie that I'm like, go. But I think you're asking us to pause and ask, was that really, the people did not consent to that, didn't consent to get those tapes back. I think this gets to the very large question of whether this technology should exist at all.
Right.
And we're not close.
No, right. It's not a real threat, but it's an interesting
not a real threat.
Moral question.
But if it did, what would that mean? What would we do with it? What should be done with it? And I confess that, it seems on the one hand, I think the movie lands on this side, and I certainly land on this side of like, erasing people's memories is an unethical thing to do and screws up society, screws up relationships in ways that you can't possibly anticipate.
Fascinating.
But I would also note...
Oh, okay.
I do. On the other angle, sometimes trauma is linked to very specific particular memories. I'm thinking of PTSD in particular, right? You could imagine some therapists who deal with PTSD maybe finding something like this useful. Electroconvulsive therapy works.
Right.
That is not erasing particular memories, but you are blasting a lot of electricity into somebody's brain, and I believe they lose some amount of recent memory.
Oh yes, for sure.
When they go through that.
Yes.
So you can imagine cases where these sorts of things directly intervening in the brain either are used, or you could kind of make a case. Yeah. And then you end up in a situation where it's like, well, where do we draw the line? Yeah, and I admit all of this makes me very uncomfortable. So I'm curious what you think.
No, I mean, I enjoyed listening to all of that. I also don't have easy answers. I mean, I should say I know more about electroconvulsive therapy than I wish I did. I have a loved one who's had long-term serious depression, so I know a little bit about this. Yes, my understanding is that it is an effective procedure. That does not mean it's effective for everyone, obviously. So just a little bit of a caution for people who are listening. The other thing I was going to say is one thing that's interesting about the film is that Joel asks the doctor, like, is this brain damage? And the doctor basically says, well, yeah, technically this is brain damage. And I think probably a similar thing could be said about electroconvulsive therapy too. So we are, I think, unambiguously meddling in people's neural biology and their actual brain material. And that one's certainly, very, very fraught. But I think I agree. Again, you haven't staked out a strong claim, and I'm not inclined to either. But I don't know that a one-size-fits-all banishment of the procedure in all context makes sense, because I am very, very sympathetic with people who can't live a normal life due to something like a post-traumatic stress response to a specific thing. I'm also reminded, there's another aspect that is, I think, a little less obvious, which is, did you ever read Brave New World, Aldous Huxley?
No.
So I was reminded of that. It's a good book, of course. And I was reminded of that in this context, right? So in the Brave New World, it's like people often contrast it with 1984, which actually came out afterward. But in 1984, there's this like super totalitarian state that is willing to do anything to punish and destroy people to make sure they think the right way. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, it's not like that. They just have developed this great drug called Soma, and everybody just opts in. Right. And so there is also this interesting, much more cultural way of thinking about these issues, which is, well, what would it mean if people were at their own leisure, at their own pleasure, allowed to alter their neural experiences in ways that left greater pleasure versus less pleasure? And I think, look, I'm not saying that Brave New World, that plot of that book is the only way that could end, but that essentially is the plot of Brave New World. And I think we're getting close to that sort of world if we invent and allow a procedure like this, at least if we allow it broadly.
I think what I found helpful to think about is the distinction between like erasing a memory to the point that you don't recognize a person anymore. I mean, in fact, let me say that differently. It's not a memory, it's a person. So it's all the memories associated with a particular person. When what I think what Clem and Joel really want to do is dull the pain associated with thinking about the memories of that person. And that feels like a smaller ask, at least ethically and philosophically, because that's really, in the wake of a breakup, what time does.
That's a good point.
Time takes away the emotional sting of thinking about the places we went to, or the things that you said, or the objects that are a part of our relationship. And so, don't get me wrong, I like that the movie went all the way and was like, no, we're going to erase your memory of them completely. But I think what people really want is a smaller thing, which is like, just make it stop hurting. I don't need to not remember. I need it to not hurt when I do.
Yeah.
All right, so tell me about any quotes you've had. We've already done a couple. Do you have any more?
One thing that I found particularly interesting is on the recording that he gave, the tape recording that he gave when he's saying, this is why I want to eliminate Clementine from my memory. And then later we're hearing it. And what he says is, What a loss to spend that much time with someone only to find out that she's a stranger.
That was also the one that I had flagged.
Sorry, dude.
In addition to the one, no, it's good because in addition to the ones we had earlier, and what I really liked about it is this similar thing of like it is kind of both true and not. Like if you think about most of the people that we will date over the course of our lives, you spend a lot of time, you really get to know that person, and then that person will end up being a stranger.
Wow, you're
and
right.
he says, what a loss to have that happen. But and that is true. It is a loss to go from being, almost infinitely intimate with somebody to being somebody, a stranger, somebody you don't know anymore. And yet it's also like kind of the point.
Do we have data? I'm not aware. Do relationship scientists ever ask people, think about this past relationship you had, and if you knew everything then, like if you could know in advance how it was going to go, would you have done it again? Do we know like what percentage of relationships meet, of say meaningful relationships meet that threshold? And
that's so cool. Free study ideas. Somebody go do it. It's really good.
Yeah, and like what are the circumstances
I don't think so.
Under which people would say like, yes, I would do this again. I would spend 3 years of my life knowing that the last 8 months would be totally miserable and that it would mean I couldn't be seeing other people in that time or whatever. Would I do it again? And my worry is that a lot of people would say no, right? Yeah. That like by and large, people would be like, no, in retrospect, not worth it. But it is interesting to consider what would actually be worth it if you could think of those thoughts prospectively, like looking forward. Yeah. What are the criteria that we would have for being like, yep, this one's going to be worth it or not worth it? And it's interesting to think about that from a prospective versus retrospective point of view.
It's also interesting because, like, what are the other domains of life? I mean, I share your intuition that people are going to come at that question and be like, no, absolutely not. Because, again, part of the process, we've talked about this on other episodes, but part of the process of getting over a breakup is coming up with a narrative for why it ended. And that narrative almost always includes my partner was a piece of shit.
Right.
So if that's the case, you can imagine that people are not going to be, would say that they wouldn't relive it. But, like, God, what other domains of life are we that, sort of dismissive or cynical of our own past?
Interesting.
Like, I mean, maybe with like a bad job or something, but like, I worked some crappy jobs when I was a teenager, but I don't like wish them away. I don't wish that I had. I don't want to go back, but I also don't like wish them away either. So it's interesting, this thing that people do with relationships. They often seem to have this particular place in our minds.
It sounds like your argument, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like your argument here is that because disentangling a relationship, ending and breaking up a relationship is sort of such a big deal and so arduous that people have to tell themselves some sort of story to get them to do it. And it is that process of telling themselves the story of the relationship that convinces them that the whole thing was kind of a waste of time from the beginning.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that's another reason why with the whole memory erasure idea, they're kind of skipping that process and maybe potentially explains why the two of them, relative to most couples who don't want to try again, why these two are happy to, because they don't remember really in a embodied way what went wrong. They're being told what went wrong, but they don't really remember it, and they certainly haven't come up with the strong narrative for why the ex is a piece of shit.
Nice. Yeah.
What do we wish we knew? The one thing I have here is that I really like the use of the objects, right? The objects connected to the relationship. But I thought even more about the way that our relationships are connected to places. And I don't think there's a lot of work on, things like the park you visited with one partner, what it's like to share that with another partner, or whether you even would share that with another partner, whether it feels too weird or too painful. Or maybe some people, it's like, hey, I got these are my restaurants. And, this is the walk that I take, on a daily basis. And new partner, please join me, just like the old partner did. So I don't really know how people sort of navigate multiple partners and the places that they inhabit in the world, but it's certainly something that real people confront as they move from relationship to relationship. And the way the movie plays with those ideas, whether it's with Montauk or with the Charles River, I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I mean, it is interesting because even after, let's say you break up with a boyfriend or something, and now you are, you moved on because that guy's a total piece of trash anyway, and then you find out that he's taken his new girlfriend to the same restaurant you guys used to go to, and you're pissed. It's like, no, that was our place. Yeah.
Right, it was our place, exactly.
Yeah. So I had a couple things. One is, I think it's related to your point about, it's not that we're two gears that align. It's this thing that we build over time. And so you can't just do the same thing with one person as you did with the other person and have it be equally successful. One thing that's wild about this movie is that Joel and Clementine get like 2 first meetings, 2 first conversations, 2 first interactions. And one thing I just wish we knew, I have no idea how you would do this in any ethical way, but what if you could like rerun the relationship? We've talked about this before. What if you could rerun the relationship multiple times with the same person? Or you could imagine a study, I mean, how cool would this be, where you rerun a relationship, right? Imagine that you could just reboot people and just rerun the relationship, and say you do that 10 times with 100 different partners. To what extent is it true that you're attracted to the same person, especially every time you meet, and like there's some other person that you're incompatible with every time, versus like you just happen to get like hit on a good conversation topic, or somebody happened to make a comment that seemed like a clever, subtle wisecrack in the moment, and you could have just as easily been attracted to somebody else. You play in these ideas.
Oh, yeah, right. I love this idea, too. And I've long thought that, it's this random walk that people go through when they're first meeting and having conversations, right? Where there's, anywhere between 4 and 40 logical conversation topics in a given moment. Yeah. But you're only going to find that little spark in like 2 or 3 of them, right? And so do you find the random walk to the right spot or to the many bad spots? And I think some people are better at this than others, but I don't think it's all that predictable ahead of time whether or not 2 people are going to do it in that conversation. Now, I do think you could use experimental methods to like give them a leg up, right? So we know from the Art Aaron studies that you can give people conversation topics that will help them land on intimacy building things. But left to their own devices, if you rerun the conversation between 2 people over and over again, and have them sort of try to navigate that getting to know you process, my guess is that you often end up in pretty different places. But you'd need a time machine.
You need a time machine or some, I don't know, memory erasure process.
Yeah.
I did have one other thing that I wish we knew. And look, maybe memory researchers could answer this for us. I don't think relationship scientists can do it yet. You've already observed that the neuroscience of this memory destruction procedure is not especially compelling. But it's worth mentioning that there's like an explicit memory and implicit memory, and what they're really eliminating here are explicit memories, right? Things that you could bring to mind, that you could say, yes, I know the year that Columbus sailed the ocean blue, or whatever else. I know that Clementine now has orange hair. And then there's implicit memories, which are, these less conscious thoughts or feelings that we might, associate with someone, for example. And one thing that I think we don't really know is like, if we could imagine a world in which you forgot every single thing about your significant other, you couldn't remember a single thing, when you encountered her, wouldn't you still have associations, right? Yeah. I mean, again, you could imagine different versions of the memory technology, but just to drive this home, I'm reminded of the famous Maya Angelou observation, which is, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Yeah. And I wonder whether even if you got rid of all the explicit memories, you might still have these unconscious associations, which may help to explain why the second time around Joel and Clementine were so into each other right from the beginning.
Man, relationship science in the year 2500 is going to be off the hook. So tell me, how many stars do you give this movie on a scale of 1 to 5 stars?
All 5, and very enthusiastically. It was a heartbreaking work of staggering genius.
I give this movie 4 stars. I like it quite a bit. It doesn't hit me in the feels in quite the same way that some of the other movies do. And I deeply love the sci-fi angle as an intellectual exercise. I like it a lot. So 4-star movie from here for Eternal Sunshine. But we also award Rust Bolts on this show. The Rust Bolt is named after Eli's advisor, the late, great Carol Rust Bolt, pioneer of close relationships research, with 5 stars indicating a near-perfect depiction of the nature of close relationships. I give this movie 4 Rust Bolts. I think it does a pretty great job on the whole, especially of depicting sort of that target-specific nature of the way relationships work and the way conflict often goes badly. And one of the reasons I don't give it a full 5 stars is some of the cynicism that you point out. Right? You actually spend a lot of time watching some pretty grim relationships over the entire course of this movie. It's not a lot of levity, and also I think that there's a lot of the relationship initiation process that we just kind of don't get to see. And I really, you know me, I like to see that whole arc from start to finish. But I'm curious where you land on the Rust Bolts.
I gave this 5 Rust Bolts too.
Whoa,
I really love the movie. And in fact, there's that famous Jerry Maguire line, like, you had me at hello. This one, the very last line in the movie is okay. And it's like, that was the moment. I just
you had me at okay.
I love the representation of like, it's going to be brutal in the following ways, and I'm going to have these things, and we're going to fight. Are we ready for that? Are we okay with that? And they look at each other and they say, okay. And then that's the end of the movie. I love it so much.
It's good stuff. Well, this has been the Love Factually podcast. We are your hosts, Paul Eastwick and Eli Finkel. And Eli, I look forward to seeing you next time.
I'm excited for it. The Love Factually podcast is produced and edited by Paul Eastwick and Eli Finkel, featuring music from Andrew Fraker and Sons.